Do y'all have any fun plans for this weekend coming up? It's Tuesday and I'm already thinking about Friday.
No, just rolling on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's my husband's 30th birthday this Friday.
Oh,
So doing it up big for him.
what are y'all gonna do?
So we got a room just at the oceanfront at the new Marriott. So I'm pretty excited about that. And then we're going to do a day of all his favorite things on Saturday. Of course, I had to plan everything around Georgia football. The game comes on at 4, so we have to be back by then. And then, yeah, I bought him like a bunch of stuff, a bunch of workout gear and more Georgia apparel. So I'm excited.
Nice.
Yeah.
Did you both go there?
No, so neither one of us even went there. We just grew up as like Georgia football fans. And so.
Oh, that's right. You're both from Georgia. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're a Bulldogs fan and a Falcons fan by default. And every year a little bit sad, but you just stay a fan and keep on going.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. We got some people rolling in. Cool.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll give them a few more minutes.
So Whitney and anyone else who has kids, are you guys do anything for trick-or-treating? I mean,
I have no idea. I am taking it a week at a time. So, I'm hopeful that we will at least be able to go to a few houses of people that we know. It definitely won't be what we normally would do. So, I think as long as you kind of spin it as a positive thing, my kids, at least my younger ones, are young enough that they don't feel too, upset about it.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
If I tell them we're going trick-or-treating, but to their favorite people's homes, then they'll probably be just fine with that. So.
I was talking to one of my girlfriends, and she lives in a cul-de-sac area, and they're pretty close with their neighbors. And they were talking about that, like what they were going to do with COVID in mind. And so they actually were thinking about doing like a scavenger hunt with like their neighbors that they are comfortable with.
That's a great idea.
So doing it that way, that way they can still be in their costumes, but still keep it fun and just a short time. So
yeah,
I thought that was smart and a cute idea.
Yeah, definitely. I like that idea.
Very cute. I have no idea what me and Lila are doing, but she's not a super candy kid. So there's an upside to that, I guess. She's not going to miss out too bad.
That's kind of lucky.
Yeah.
Mine would stage a mutiny if there wasn't candy at Halloween.
Yeah, I'm lucky. She's not a candy kid at all.
What is she like?
The most that she'll do is like a chocolate candy bar, and then that's it. But she doesn't.
How old is she?
She's 11.
Okay.
Yeah.
So old enough to like have decided on her preferences and everything and know what she wants.
Yeah, well, even when she was little, I never did candy, so
yeah,
she never into it, I guess. But,
yeah.
It's made it easy.
Yeah.
Okay, the final countdown, 1 minute. Drum roll.
We're recording this, right?
We are, yes.
Okay, good.
Yes. Yeah, everyone loved our last recording, our plant talk in the beginning. I don't know if we'll ever. Okay, cool. So it's 9:03. I definitely want to be respectful of everyone's time. So thank you, panelists, for joining us this morning and volunteering. And then also thank you for all of our attendees in the audience and our virtual audience. I can't see you, but I know you're there. Also, thank you to Corasil, who is sponsoring this episode for us. It's our second episode in Diversity Through Design, and we're going to focus on the challenges within the industry. And so Corasil has definitely been an ally to us and has been so supportive through the whole process. And so we definitely wanted to, give them an opportunity to showcase them. And so you can also remember that you can donate to Teens with a Cause. The link is on our website, and it should also be in the email that you received whenever you registered. And so you can definitely donate to that if you're willing and able. And so kind of through this episode, like I said, we're going to be talking about challenges within the industry. So we're going to be talking about race, gender, licensure, a few other topics. And so I definitely want to unpack some issues that, many of our A&D peers maybe don't realize that are actually prevalent. And so, of course, I want you to be watching and listening through a few sets of eyes. And so kind of ask yourself a few things as we go through. So in the first episode, I kind of challenge everyone to try and identify how and why their introduction to architecture and design differed from our panelists. And so in this episode, I want to challenge everyone to kind of pinpoint when you notice some of the challenges that we're going to be talking about have come up, and then ask yourself if you're able to, speak up when it happens and become an advocate for your peers. And so my goal is to kind of go beyond the typical challenges that we might see that, come with being a minority in the industry, but to, address a few systemic challenges that we don't always think about. And so I'd like to start off by kind of discussing the full umbrella of being a minority and what diversity actually means to some of the panelists. And so it's easy for us to, see minorities and racial groups as racial groups, but I've also challenged our panelists to think beyond race and talk a little bit about what the word diversity actually means to them. So Whitney, I'm going to start with you, and I'd like you to open up and tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and then also just kind of explain what diversity really means to you.
Sure, thank you. So I co-own a small firm, and we have a really diverse group of 7 individuals who work in our Virginia office for E&V. And what's interesting about our firm that's been kind of cool to experience, we have 2 women in architecture, and we have 2 men who are trained in design. And traditionally those roles are swapped. And so we've had kind of an interesting perspective in that sense. And we do have people of color in our firm. And recently, something that, has come to our attention is that we were asked to do some diversity studies, some studies on diversity and inclusion, and how that applied to space and facilities for a very large company here in Richmond. And what was so interesting to think through as a team was what diversity and inclusion really encapsulated. So I think gender and race are the 2 issues that we're probably going to focus most on today, and which come up most often in the conversation around architecture and design. What was interesting to kind of for us to think through was how, even ADA issues can be accommodated. Things like intersectionality. So, we, for instance, experienced, a situation where a parking lot was created with electric car parking spaces, but was not ADA accessible. So you couldn't be an ADA individual, a wheelchair-bound individual who also drove an electric car. You couldn't be a wheelchair-bound individual who also was a nursing mother. You can be a wheelchair-bound individual and also be gender nonconforming. And so the umbrella of diversity, as we're trying to think about it more thoroughly, really encapsulates everything from visual impairment, hearing impairment, and even, the autistic community. So people who have sensory processing issues or just difficulties or even proficiencies in that way. There's very, brilliant individuals who are also autistic. And so how do we design space that suits them well, that allows them to participate in using the space the same way that an able-bodied individual would be able to?
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, that's really important for us to think about. And I'm glad that you mentioned a lot of those. You don't really realize that the electric car parking space and being handicapped at the same time, I would have never thought that. And so I'm really happy that you were able to shed some light on that. So Ashley, I'm going to come to you. And so I would love to get a brief introduction from you, but then after that, I also want to hear your thoughts on what diversity means to you, but also how are you able to incorporate that into your work?
Okay. So my name is Ashley Montgomery. I work at a firm in downtown Norfolk. So I guess a little bit about me is my background is actually in civil engineering and land surveying. And now I'm in architecture. And so I guess when I think about diversity and what it means to me, it kind of means like overarching, just kind of eliminating the status quo and considering every perspective and engaging all voices. And a lot of that is rooted in intersectional theory created by Kimberly Crenshaw. And it's really just taking into account everybody's perspective, right? Everyone has a different walk of life. Everyone uses a space differently. Everyone thinks about a space differently. And so really just being an active listener, honestly, and really listening and hearing people and understanding what their perspective is, and then finding a way to design and engage their perspective in a very holistic way. And so a lot of ways that I bring that into my work, I have a passion in resiliency and making our spaces safe and making our spaces work well with our natural systems. And so a lot of that theory work I apply to my work in resiliency. I make sure that I am engaging with the community. I make sure that I am honing my listening skills. I make sure that I don't come into a space with ego. And so that's how I try to incorporate that in a lot of my work and to try to bring that into the beginning of the work and the planning process. So that way it's not an afterthought, right? I create it at the beginning, so it's a holistic process.
Great, thank you. We definitely, I know I'm guilty of it sometimes, not, designing with that holistic idea in mind. And so I'll definitely, start picking up some of your tips so that I can be better and, design better for my clients. And so let's see, next we have, so Tia, we're gonna come to you. And so kind of Ashley, a little bit while you were talking, I know that, hold on one second, I got lost in my script. Okay, I'm ready now. Okay, so Tia, having recently finished school within the past 1 to 2 years, were you able to work on projects that you related to on a personal level? And if so, how important is that to you? How important do you think that is for designers and architects to actually be able to work on projects like that?
I think it's really important. I think, with being a recent graduate and new to the industry, the most relatable project that I've worked on thus far, was my thesis work. And so my thesis, I explored how redlining and residential segregation hindered homeownership in the Black community and contributed to the racial wealth gap. So as a secondary part of our thesis, we had to choose a building and sort of reimagine and redesign it. And so I decided to choose the former St. Luke's Penny Savings Bank, which is in the Jackson Ward neighborhood in Richmond. And it was befitting for my project, not only because, it was relevant to building wealth and it was a former bank, but also because it was founded by Maggie Walker in 1903. And she was the first Black female bank president in the country. So for me personally, it was important to focus on an issue that affected, my community. And because I was so invested in that, it made the work a little easier. I can recall pulling, numerous all-nighters and trying to juggle school and work, but because it was something that was personally important to me, it made it a little bit easier. I chose to pursue interior design because, one, I love design, And two, I wanted to be able to affect change within my community. So, as a designer, I think as a good designer, you can always produce beautiful work, whether or not a project is relatable to you or not. But I have found personally that if it's something that you're personally invested in and something that's important to you, it allows you to dig a little deeper and, help you produce a better outcome.
Nice. I do kind of want to expand on that a little bit. So during your research with that project, did you have like any kind of, emotional revelation, or how did that really make you feel throughout the whole process?
I went through an array of emotions. I was angry, but at the same time, I came, to a point where I was proud because we are so resilient. And so it was just being able to, dig into research that I had never learned, even through, 12 years of school, elementary school to high school, some things that I had never learned, about, my culture or, Richmond, Virginia or Jackson Ward and, how it was formerly known as the Harlem of the South. I never learned that in school. And so being able to kind of dig into that and learn, those things, about a city that's an hour and a half away. And just being able to, take pride in that was personally important to me.
Nice. Thank you. So Bert, I'm going to shift it over to you. I would definitely want you to give a little quick introduction about yourself. And then after that, I would like to know if you don't mind speaking on kind of the genesis of architectural history within the African-American community and what that means to you.
Sure. A little bit different perspective from my other panels. I'm going to just put it in the context that I did in another talk. I was born just on this side of being colored. I was able to call myself Negro, as my certificate said when I was born. Then I became Negro or Black, and then I became Black or African American. And so still working on identity as seen by sort of a society. But I'm originally from Tuskegee, Alabama, the deep South kind of thing. It's interesting in that we talk about generational wealth, right? We know what that is. That's sort of a systemic building of wealth through generations. And I think if we put that in the context of generational identity, I think it's hard to understand where the architectural history of the Black community begins in this country, because it doesn't have a history, doesn't have a generational identity. And so in that same talk, I just talked about, someone asked me, what is Black architecture? And it was like, is there a Black architecture? And I'm like, well, I guess not really when you think about this country and that history. So this generational identity is something that we should work to reclaim and identify. I mean, there are certainly practitioners out there who are doing great jobs and leaps and bounds and getting there. But it's more than just a style of design, how you approach the aesthetics of design, but it's what is inherent in the ideals of that design. A quick little example is just one of these things I just always want to point out. Think about just in residential design or housing design, you talk about master bedrooms. Just take a minute and think what that alludes to, right? That's the kind of design history and theory from which we all come, because that's how it was born and that's how it was propagated. The idea of hierarchy, the idea of primary, secondary, so forth and so on within design, I think is something that, again, is rooted in how we were taught and how we learned, but moving the sphere to think that everything we do is about building capacity, it's about building community, it's about inclusivity, it's about diversity. I think those are sort of ideals that maybe a Black architecture can embody. I don't know if I even answered your question, Alexa. I just sort of went off.
It was great. I don't even remember my question. I just loved hearing you talk. Okay, cool. So, Willie, are you able to, did you get your sound to work? Oh, you're on mute though.
Yes, I'm back.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we're up to you. And so kind of as Tia was speaking to, you know, thinking or learning more about the heritage within her project. So I was thinking a lot about just kind of like self-identity and how important that is, knowing who you are inside and out. And so after you give a quick introduction about yourself, do you mind kind of speaking on how you've been able to overcome challenges in your career by knowing who you are and standing your ground and staying focused?
Sure. I'm Willie Cooper. I'm a senior architect and principal at Clark Nixon here in Virginia Beach. I've worked at quite a few of the firms here in the Hampton Roads area, and also I worked for Sims Varner in Detroit, who at the time, that was the late 80s, was one of the largest Black-owned firms in the country. So a pretty varied experience. As far as different places, different size firms, that sort of thing. To your question, I've kind of approached it the way Blacks have throughout history, which is focus on the job and not the glory. If you can make your client's problem your own problem, and approach it as if it was your company and your money, then you'll be better than 80% of the architects out there. And interestingly enough, that's a bit of advice that I think anybody can use, not just minorities. But as a minority, there are a tremendous amount of distractions in our industry. It's emotionally and mentally often a very stressful and tough position to be in. And the cure to all of that is focusing on the job.
Thank you. We actually just got a message in the chat box. I'm not sure, Willie, if you want to speak on this or if anyone else would like to chime in, but the question is, have any of you ever faced undeniable racism and how have you been able to resolve it?
Well, I can speak to that. For me, I see different levels. I mean, there are people out there who feel like a certain race should lead and should be at the top no matter what. But interestingly enough, that's a rarity. More of the racism that I think that you run into is kind of baked into the cake. We have a very competitive sort of environment. Architecture is, it's competitive between firms, and it's even competitive between people in firms. So oftentimes that competitive spirit gets people taking advantage of maybe some of the disadvantages that you may have as being the only person, whether that's a minority or a female or whatever. We're going out there and we're asking a company to give us $100 million to basically build their company a new home. So almost anything can spook them as far as that decision making. And there's always people that are going to try to take advantage of that. But as I said before, if you're known as a person who focuses on the job and seriously accepts the challenges that the owner has, that's more important to them in most cases than racism. And for myself, I've worked with Fortune 500 companies. I've found myself in places where, you know, I kind of looked at myself and said, wow, I'm the only guy here. I may be the only guy who's ever been here, you know. But the clients kind of get over it. And once they see that you're a hard worker, you're dedicated to the problem, and you know what you need to know to get it done, they generally kind of accept that.
Nice. Would anyone else like to comment on that?
Yeah, just for a second. I mean, there's the overt racism, which I don't think I need to talk about, that probably every Black man and woman has experienced somehow. But also, so I at one point I was the majority owner of my own business, so I was a minority entity. And while it's sort of a reverse racism conversation, you know, when we started the firm, it was, we will not sort of certify ourselves as a minority owned business enterprise, because currently that has, to some degree, a stigma attached to it, in that
Yep.
as jurisdictions, as people try to build capacity within minority owned businesses and larger white owned businesses, to partner with them to satisfy, dare I say, the word quotas, that attaches a stigma to them that just sort of perpetuates. And so in starting the business, I said, well, let's not do that and try to sort of build our reputation just on, as Will was saying, doing the job, doing good work. Now, then we weren't stupid about it. After an opportunity came up that said, okay, to be able to participate, we'd like to be a minority owned business. Okay, done, let me run to City Hall, get that done. But that's a kind of thing that, while it's designed to elevate and build capacity, it also perpetuates, to some degree, a stigma. So something we got to work on.
Yeah. If I could throw in with what Bert was saying, definitely agree with you. And another problem that I think Black firms have is getting the best people. It's almost like the problem the HBCUs are having with athletes. You know, they want to go to the schools where they're going to get the TV exposure and that. So sometimes getting the best people is difficult for any small firm, but especially so for minority-owned firms.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. Okay, so I see a few other questions in the comment box. We will come back to those in 1 second. And so yeah, I'm going to kind of switch gears now. And Whitney, I'm going to come back to you. And now I'd like to talk about the licensing within our industry. And I would like to just get your perspective and kind of your experience on you getting licensed as an architect.
Sure. So I took maybe a little bit of an unconventional path in that my undergraduate degree was a 5-year program in interior architecture. So I'm certified as an interior designer. I'm also a licensed architect, and I've done LEED as well. So that's over, a 12-year period. But I'm really just finishing up the path to licensure for architecture alone. And I will say, one thing that kind of spurred this conversation, I shared an article with the rest of the panel that was in Architectural Record recently about the licensure process for architecture specifically, and how, and whether it has an impact on people from diverse backgrounds entering our profession. While I was in licensure, I was also having a new experience. My husband and I became foster parents 4 years ago. And so, being a parent now to a child who is who's Black, who's grown up in poverty, who is gender nonconforming in a sense, that there's a lot that comes with that my eyes have been open to, and I can only think about what things might look like through that kid's eyes, if they were to pursue something like this. And so the numbers really kind of speak for themselves, in the sense that we're just starting to see women really come into the profession. I think a lot of that has to do with the licensure process and the length of the licensure process. So, the average time frame for people getting licensed is somewhere in the range of 12 years. School is such that you have to get a 5-year degree or a master's degree. The course load in our industry is such that it's very difficult to work while you're in school. So you're coming out, generally speaking, with student debt. You're getting paid very little when you start. I mean, my first job out of school, I had 5 internships while I was in college, and I graduated with my 5-year degree, and I was ready to go. And I got paid less than a teacher, you know, my first few years out of school. And so that was a difficult, you know, I've been lucky enough that I married young, and I married someone who isn't in our industry, who actually makes, you know, a living doing something different. And that is really the only reason that we've been able to family plan. You know, I can't imagine if I had been a single parent, I would not be here. I would not be doing what I'm doing if I had been in that position. And so I can only empathize in that sense, you know, to say, okay, are we making the architectural profession as a whole accessible to anyone? You know, I think there are a few things that are prohibiting us from that. There's something about, you know, there's a lot of redundancy, you know, logging experience with NCARB, then proving that experience to your estate, then proving it, you know, again to NCARB after you've taken your exams, you know, it gets reviewed again. And now, you know, I'm taking Masters of Architecture courses, and they want to review my experience also. So, you know, here I am 15 years into my career, and my experience is still being peer reviewed in order to become licensed, in order to, you know, be a student who's passing my classes and doing what the university wants me to. So there is some redundancy there. I think the cost of exams and licensure is much greater in our field because of the volume of them. You know, for an attorney or an engineer, you know, lawyers are not required to have any professional experience. They come out of school, they take their test, they're done. You know, for architects, it's much different. We have to have experience and, you know, education before we're even eligible to sit for our exams. Then the exam process usually costs several $1,000s. It's usually before you're making any real money in your field, you know, that you have to do that. And here I am at 35, you know, going into my non-childbearing years, you know, as a woman. You hit 35 and you're geriatric in the maternity sense. And so I do think that there's something about, you know, the numbers don't lie. I mean, the numbers are telling us that minorities are dropping out of the profession. You know, they're 30% more likely to drop out of the profession during the licensure process. Women really are bearing the brunt of the domestic work at home, and that's influencing some of what they're able to give to their profession. They can't afford childcare on some of the salaries that we're paying women, you know, in their early 30s. So I think that definitely has some merit to it. And I think, you know, it's an interesting conversation around our processes and some of the redundancies and some of the, you know, the box checking. We don't want to do things just to do them. We want to do them because they're productive. And I think there's a little bit of, you know, elitism in our field that doesn't make it a very accessible or flexible field of study.
Great, thank you. A lot of good topics. Willie, I know that you also have a lot of opinions about the same topic, and so I kind of want to hear from you about why you think the licensing process should not be changed.
Well, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say that it shouldn't be changed. I took the exam 30 years ago, so so I'm hardly a current resource for the problems, and the stuff that Whitney's just outlined is certainly sounds valid to me. I know when we were talking about this earlier, my main thing is that I don't think the exam is so much a tool to weed out certain people. To be honest with you, I think when a lot of those things are put together, they don't even consider minorities or women, because we're such a small part of the community. So kind of getting back to what Bert was saying, you know, I think we should all have to do what we all have to do, and that anything that you know, leans it one way or the other is going to stigmatize those people in the industry, and that's not helpful. So, you know, I think the bigger problem is maybe the the exam system is a little bit laborious, and maybe that can be streamlined and made better. But the bottom line is that a lot of minorities come into the profession really not aware of what it is. And the bottom line is you need a sponsor basically to get through architecture. And I think when a lot of people hit that, it's kind of a rude awakening that you know, they all, you know, their families, they may be the first to go to college. They're thinking they'll go to college and they'll get a good job. You know, when I got out of school, the first job that I had, my McDonald's manager told me he'd pay me $1 more an hour to come manage a store. So, you know, that's probably more of a problem than the exam itself.
Awesome, thank you. So Ashley, I'm gonna jump over to you. And so while you were attending Hampton University to get your master's degree, did you all talk about the licensing process? And if so, did you ever struggle with merging the architect that you wanted to be versus the professional woman that you wanted to be?
Yeah, so at Hampton, we talked a lot about the process of getting your license and what that would take. And there were a lot of ways that a lot of the process for licensure was incorporated into the academic scene, right? So at least exposing you to a lot of what you'd be taking on the test, exposing you to the kind of knowledge you'd have to have on the test, even having some of the classes kind of be formulated around a couple of the tests, just so that you could be aware as to what that was, so that you could at least start testing. And also advocating to be able to take your tests while in school, because you're already in that kind of mindset, right? To take tests and to pass them and to ace them. Whereas once you get out into the field, you know, it's harder, right? To balance that life balance with, you know, trying to maintain in an office, right? And we all know it's competitive. And then as a female and as a minority, right, you have to keep up and maintain with those opportunities at the same time that you have to study for tests and take tests. So they did make it really available and made it very accessible. And we had a conversation here probably like 2 or 3 times a year talking about the licensure process and all the avenues that you could take to be licensed. And just to echo what like Whitney and Willie were saying, it's the redundancy of the process, and it's the length of the process and how much you actually have to do. Like I could be licensed as a surveyor right now, but that's not the work that I'm trying to do. And so it's just really frustrating, I think. As architects, we talk a lot about trying to be diverse, right, for our clients and creating diverse environments, but we don't really apply that intersectional idea and theory to our own profession and how we have processes for our own profession and how we set the business for architecture in our own profession. And I think that's a serious problem.
Thank you for that. It is a problem for sure. So Tia, I'm coming over to you. Of course, you know, we've been talking about a lot about architects, but as interior designers, we know that again, our license or certification is on the chopping block for our state. And so I just want to kind of hear from you. Do you think that really just comes from a lack of knowledge? And if so, how can we kind of advocate for our profession and teach people outside of our industry and even some people within our industry, and not everyone really knows exactly everything that an interior designer does?
I do think a lack of knowledge plays a major role in the fact that our certification is at stake. You know, in my experience, a lot of people who are not in the industry will use the term interior decorating and interior design interchangeably. And as we know in the industry, they're not one and the same. And I think the HGTV era has definitely muddied the waters and affected people's perceptions. You know, even before I pursued interior design professionally, I was guilty of that myself. But, you know, interior design goes a lot further than picking, you know, paint colors or fabric swatches or furniture. And to not to downplay interior decorating, because it is an important facet of interior design, but interior design goes so much further than that. You know, as the designers, we have an ethical responsibility to, you know, protect the people who are inhabiting or using the spaces that we design. And that applies to, you know, code compliance, accessibility, fire, life safety, and different, you know, building codes and regulations. So our certifications are just as important as, you know, an architect certification. And so I think as professionals, we have to try and change the narrative and, you know, have people understand what we know interior design to be. And I think the best way to do that is just educating the decision makers. So.
Awesome, thanks. Of course, I had to throw that in there. I know we talk about that a lot, and we talked about it on our first episode, but we have to raise awareness every time I get the chance, right?
Yes.
Okay, so Bert, I'm going to come over to you. And so have any of the challenges that we talked about today changed over your career, or were they the same challenges that you faced in the beginning?
No, they have changed for sure. And again, I'm now in my late 50s, and having been working in this industry since pretty much 21. The challenges initially are a lot that my younger colleagues and panelists have talked about early on, and some still persist. But I think where I am now with my firm is, how do we sort of provide the services? How do we reach the community that we've been talking about? So how when you know that sort of less than 10% of the built environment is affected by architects in the grand scheme of things, how do you bring services to the underserved communities, right? So part of that was when we started the nonprofit Storefront for Community Design, that counts on volunteerism of very smart people like that are on this panel to come in and work with communities that are underserved. I think that's my current challenge, is to how do we reach back at this point, as opposed to sort of completely looking forward.
Great, thank you. Debbie, did you want to go over some of the questions that we got in the chat box? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. We have one question here. Do you feel that, let me scroll up. Do you feel that you have always had to overprove yourself, your worth? I know for myself, younger, Hispanic, female, that definitely I can relate to that. So have any of you guys had to feel like you've had to overprove yourself in certain situations? And this can go to anyone.
Well, I'll jump in on that. Absolutely. Not only have I felt that way, but I think that was actually the reality. A lot of times when you're given an opportunity as a minority or a female, people feel like they're taking a bigger risk than maybe if someone else was doing it. So mistakes are very limiting to your future opportunities. So absolutely. And there's two ways to look at that. I mean, the one is that it's tougher for you, and it is. But the other is that it makes you have to be better. So what I've done is, I remember a long time ago walking across the drill field at Tech, it hit me that I'm born now, and I have 75 to 80 years to spend it. It would be great if I was born 50 years from now, when a lot of stuff I don't have to deal with is not there anymore, but these are the years I got. I have to deal with that. So it's a good thing and a bad thing, but it's definitely a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to agree. And it's, even you know, working now, you know, as a new employee, as a minority, you know, that feeling is there. But it goes further than that. It's, you know, it goes back further than that. And, you know, in other situations and other positions and other jobs, I think it's just, for me personally, it's always been an underlying issue. Because you know that there are challenges there, you know, with, you know, racism or people's perceptions of you that you may or may not know. So I think for me, it's kind of always been an underlying current. And I think it is probably true for a lot of, you know, minorities, you know, working in life in general.
We also have another question. What kinds of conversations about race have you had in your offices, if any, since the protests about systemic racism began in late May?
So our firm of 150 plus people across multiple locations, you know, the question was, what is the statement we want to make in the light of the things that have happened in recent past? And we didn't come out necessarily with a statement publicly, but the internal conversations certainly were, there are things that we have been doing historically that we should be doing. I mentioned sort of the volunteerism and working with nonprofits and underserving communities, the type of work that the firm was doing in certain sectors, whether it's in affordable housing or recognizing the histories of African Americans and Blacks in the country and other venues like that. And whether it was sort of engaging with our HBCUs or providing sort of mentorship to primary and secondary population, to the young kids where we want them, their interest in the profession to start. Those things were already part of our DNA and how we practiced it, but it was not within a framework that everybody could understand what we were doing or what was available to them to do. So the conversations about race within the firm took that tone of, how do we do what we've been doing better? Right? How do we set it up so that it is certainly more effective and the outcomes that we're looking for are more robust and tangible? Without, as I mentioned before, creating a double-edged sword. I think I met Ashley when she was still at Hampton, and I was like, that is a very talented woman, and I'm just gonna throw my name in the hat to see if it works out. That's where I want to be. I want to just find that talent and grab it. And so, you know, just let me know, Ashley, how, you know, somewhere, just, I'm here. Okay. But the conversations are ongoing. And also, sort of, now we start to talk about how do we recognize biases within the processes. We talked about licensure, we talked about other things that have some inherent biases. Well, they are there. And so let's understand what they are, how they are, and try to sort of overcome them. That's where our conversations are today.
Yeah, we had a similar experience at our firm. We didn't make like a public statement, but we did have like an internal conversation, and it was very open. I will say it was kind of uncomfortable because I guess when we're having these conversations, if we as minorities or those that are diverse aren't leading the conversation, a lot of us felt very awkward in engaging in that conversation, right? Because we're not kind of setting the tone for that. And so it was kind of awkward in that sense. But it was a great conversation. And I think, you know, it was well received of everybody in the firm. But then, you know, it's the follow-up for that kind of is the impetus, right? Because you can't have conversations and be open about this dialogue and then not have some kind of formation of a lineup. And so it takes a process getting there, but I think it's about recognizing that we have to work in this awareness all day, every day. We are diverse and minorities all day, every day. And so we already work in this level of awareness, but then once everyone else is aware of the same situation and aware of how we feel about a situation. And then there's no action on that. It feels like it weighs heavier, if that makes any sense. And so that's something I think that we're working through. Yeah, it was a very internal conversation, but I think it was good. And I think, these things take time, right? To figure out how to really integrate that and how to really get rid of biases that we have against minorities and females in this industry.
Yeah, I think at Clark Nixon, we're a 100-year-old firm, and I think that inherently brings maybe a kind of a bit of a negative connotation to minorities, and I would suspect women too. But Clark Nixon puts a big effort in. You always say evolution is almost an accidental thing. And development is directed. It's like you pick where you want to go and you try to do things to make yourself that or better. And so Clark Nixon invests a lot of time in that. And I think, they do all of the things, the charities, the working with historically Black colleges, those kinds of things. They do all of those things. But I think we're all right now trying to deal with race on a deeper level. And we're all kind of looking at each other and wondering, how do we make that next step? How do we do that? And so, we have committees that work on that and are trying to make that better, but it's a really difficult thing. And I think what a lot of us minorities maybe don't get is that we're going to have to maybe reach across to help find that better place for everybody. So it's a difficult thing. To me, it's probably the most difficult thing we have to deal with as a society, and as a profession. It's complicated. So we're all dealing with it. I can certainly applaud the effort that Clark Nixon is making at it. So we'll see where we go with it.
For me, we didn't necessarily have a conversation at my firm. I did have 2 one-off conversations with 2 of my coworkers and they were pretty productive and also eye-opening for me as well. So, I appreciate, those conversations that I was able to have, with my coworkers, to see their point of view, for them to see my point of view. That was my experience with, conversations in regards to race.
We have a question for me. Do you feel there needs to be a larger Mexican Hispanic presence in architecture? And how can we change it for the future? For me, I think Hispanic and Latino representation in architecture, just from personally what I have seen, is there tends to be, when I walk into a room, if it's a conference, if it's a meeting, or if I'm just reading articles, it tends to be more male Hispanics that are in the architecture roles. When I personally do walk into any kind of meeting that I'm a part of, I do notice right away that I'm probably one of maybe 1 or 2 Hispanic in the room. So I think there's more Hispanic and Latino that are in the field of design. I would like to see that increase, but also in architecture and engineering. It is nice to see that representation when you walk into a room and see all different kinds of cultures. So I think we're getting there. I think, I'm starting to see more of that. I don't know if you guys see the same thing when you walk into certain spaces, but for me, That's what I see.
I think diversity in general is something that we need to see as a positive thing. You know, the answer is always yes, we should see more of this underrepresented population, you know, whether that's gender, whether that's ethnicity, you know, or able-bodied individuals. You know, I think in general, part of what I think has stunted our ability to move forward and embrace diversity and inclusion is because we see it as this like necessary evil. You know, ADA is a necessary evil. You know, it's a building code that we have to follow, and we're just going to do the minimum. And you know, it's something that I think we have to push to say we're not just going to do what's required. We're going to do the right thing. And if the right thing is more than what's required, then that's what we're going to advise you to do. And I think there's something that's really powerful about, you know, tilling the soil, so to speak. Like you don't want to wait until you have a problem with diversity to figure out what to fix. You want to go ahead and make your workplace a place where diversity and teamwork and the humility and vulnerability to say, I don't know, or I don't understand what that's like. Can you tell me? I think that is what is really going to get us from point A to B. We haven't, you know, the conversations that we've had at our firm, we're a women-owned firm, but we're both Caucasian women. So there's things that we aren't going to understand. I think having the humility to say, I'm learning myself about my own biases, you know, I'm learning myself about things that were never taught to me, but doing the work to get there, you know, and setting the groundwork to allow diversity to thrive, not because you make it thrive, but because you've created an environment that allows it to thrive. I think that's a lot of the legwork that we all have to do. You know, for our own companies, but also for our clients.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that, Whitney. And I think a lot of companies see diversity as a numbers game, a formula. And I always think it's funny because they collect the right proportions of people from different races and genders and things like that, and then they try to make them all think the same, and and that defeats the purpose. Once people realize that the whole idea is the more ideas you have, the more likely you are to find the best idea, and the way that works is to have divergent thinking. And the trick is not to have the right amount of blacks and the right amount of Latinas and the right amount of whites. The trick is to have the right amount of people who think differently, but can maintain their independence while still coming together to produce a better whole.
We have another question. And actually, I think this one could probably be, so great discussion this morning, very insightful, thought-provoking, thank you. If time permits, could we please talk about education, specifically K through 8 years old, and how folks on this call can get involved to help provide more opportunities for underserved groups to access programming that might change the trajectory of their lives. And we can speak about this briefly, but we will also have an episode coming up on October 20th that will address A&D and the roles K through 12 education to our youth. But if anyone wants to speak on that.
Yeah, I'll quickly interrupt. I think understanding that there are partners within that space, in the K through 12 space, out working in the environment, our job is sort of find them and sort of work with them. I talked about some of the programs that we've tried to do with our nonprofit. You know, one of them is called City Builders. It serves an underserved population of youth, and it helps them understand the impact of design on their everyday lives, be it zoning laws, be it housing design, be it whatever it is. But it is sort of putting sort of design in the space of empowerment and not necessarily a sort of nice to have kind of thing, but getting engaged, with the other partners, because they're out there, is probably a very big first step.
And what advice do you give to recent graduates in interior design and architecture about these topics?
I guess I would say, it's important, I guess, to know who you are, and to know yourself under pressure, and to know yourself in the face of diversity, and who are you in that space? Because you, as a minority and someone who's diverse, you're entering a space that does not look like you, and half the time it doesn't think like you, or it doesn't really hold the way you engage in culture in the same way. And so I think it's important just to stand firm in who you are, and be able to find in your own way to communicate that. And then I think you'll be fine, because in the end, you gotta own yourself, right? To be able to engage in these conversations and to be able to move forward in a mental space that's safe and okay and happy. So know yourself and know who you want to be as a designer. It's really important to get through it.
Great. Billy, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I was. When I got into the profession, and probably when Bert did, there just weren't that many of us. And I do wonder now if it was actually easier for us than it is for people getting into the profession now. It just seems like for us, the clarity of quote unquote, the battle lines were so much clearer and simpler then. And now it seems like it's very complicated. So I can certainly understand how young people sort of walking out into this world now are facing quite a challenge. So I know that's not helpful, but just an observation.
We just have to, address what the problem is. We'll figure out how to handle it later. But y'all, this was great. Thank you so much. We are at the hour, 10 o'clock, and so I don't want to keep everyone too long. Thank you for everyone who attended and left comments. I know we didn't get to every one of them, but we'll try and kind of incorporate those in our next episodes. We do have 3 more. The next one will be not next Thursday, but the Thursday after that. I forget the exact date. But yeah, so definitely tune in. And if you all have any questions, feel free to reach out to us and we'll try to get you all connected if you have any questions. If any of the audience has specific questions for the panelists, definitely reach out to us and we'll try to connect you all. But that's all we have for you today. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Alexis.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Yep.
Thank you.